The day coordination replaced control. No one announced it. No authority surrendered power. Yet quietly, almost imperceptibly, control slipped out of single hands and reappeared somewhere else, distributed, shared, and negotiated in real time. Coordination had begun doing what command no longer could. London's financial system had grown too vast for direct control. Rules multiplied. Oversight expanded. Authority layered upon authority. Yet outcomes became harder to steer. Interventions arrived late. Signals conflicted. Control existed everywhere, and effectiveness nowhere. The architecture of command, which had been built for a simpler era, was buckling under the weight of a system that had outgrown the capacity of any single authority to comprehend, let alone direct. To understand why this moment mattered, we must return to a time when complexity outpaced hierarchy. Markets moved across institutions, borders, and time zones simultaneously. No single actor could see the whole picture. Decisions made in isolation produced unintended consequences elsewhere. Control fractured under its own weight. The very mechanisms designed to maintain order were generating confusion, as overlapping directives from multiple authorities created contradictions that participants could not resolve. The reveal emerged when participants stopped waiting for instruction and started aligning instead. Institutions shared information horizontally rather than vertically. Responses were coordinated rather than ordered. Action depended less on permission and more on mutual awareness. The shift was organic rather than designed. No committee planned it. No regulation mandated it. It emerged from a collective recognition that waiting for centralized instruction in a decentralized environment was more dangerous than acting on shared understanding. This was not cooperation born of trust. It was coordination born of necessity. Each actor realized that acting alone was riskier than acting together. Stability no longer came from authority imposing order, but from systems adjusting in sync. London had crossed the threshold. Power was no longer defined by who could command. It was defined by who could align. As coordination replaced control, London's financial system began moving in a new way. Signals traveled laterally instead of upward. Institutions watched one another closely, adjusting behavior based on shared awareness rather than directives. Stability emerged from synchronization, not obedience. This shift altered incentives immediately. Acting out of step became dangerous. A single institution, moving alone, risked amplifying stress. Aligning responses reduced shock. Coordination became a form of self-preservation. Markets learned to listen sideways. The reputational and financial costs of misalignment created a powerful incentive to observe and match the behavior of peers, producing a form of collective discipline that was more responsive than any centralized authority could have achieved. Information sharing expanded, not out of transparency idealism, but out of risk management. Early warnings circulated informally. Expectations were calibrated collectively. Decisions were timed to avoid surprise. The system became less hierarchical, but more interdependent. The flow of information that had once moved vertically through chains of command now moved horizontally through networks of mutual observation, creating a collective awareness that exceeded what any single institution could possess. Tension followed. Coordination blurred accountability. When everyone moved together, responsibility diffused. Success belonged to the system. Failure belonged to no one. Critics warned that alignment could hide errors as effectively as authority once had. The diffusion of responsibility was not merely an administrative inconvenience. It was a structural vulnerability that made it impossible to identify and correct mistakes at their source. The danger emerged when coordination hardened into consensus. Divergent signals were ignored. Alternative responses were dismissed to preserve unity. The system gained coherence, but lost optionality. Coordination risked becoming conformity. The pressure to align created a form of groupthink in which institutions that perceived risks differently hesitated to act on those perceptions for fear of disrupting the collective response. London recognized the trade-off. Control had failed under complexity. Coordination restored responsiveness, but carried its own fragility. If everyone aligned on the wrong assumption, error would spread faster than ever. The city now stood at another inflection point. Could coordination remain flexible, or would it calcify into a new form of control, invisible but just as rigid? The tension surfaced when coordination faced its first true test. A sudden disruption demanded rapid response, and alignment formed almost instantly. Institutions moved together, adjusted together, and signaled reassurance together. At first, it worked. Volatility softened. Panic paused. But beneath that calm, a problem emerged. Because everyone coordinated, no one challenged the assumption guiding the response. Alternative interpretations were sidelined. Signals that did not fit the shared narrative were discounted. Coordination had become reflexive. The speed of alignment had outpaced the speed of analysis, producing a response that was fast and unified but potentially wrong. The conflict deepened as outcomes diverged from expectations. Losses appeared where alignment had promised stability. Adjustments lagged because breaking formation felt risky. Acting differently meant acting alone, and acting alone carried reputational cost. The system had traded hierarchy for harmony, but harmony resisted correction. When misalignment appeared, it spread quietly before anyone dared disrupt consensus. Coordination amplified speed, but also amplified error. Institutions began to feel trapped by their own alignment. To deviate was to signal distrust. To question was to destabilize confidence. The very mechanism that replaced control now constrained adaptation. The social dynamics of coordination had created a new form of rigidity that was harder to identify and harder to resist than the old hierarchical rigidity, because it operated through peer pressure rather than directive. The breaking moment came when a coordinated response failed visibly. Markets reacted sharply, not to the disruption itself, but to the realization that alignment had mass vulnerability. Confidence cracked because coordination had promised more than it could deliver. London confronted a sobering truth. Coordination is powerful, but not neutral. When alignment becomes automatic, it replaces one form of rigidity with another. Control disappears, but conformity takes its place. The city now faced a choice. Could coordination be redesigned to allow divergence, or had it already become the new invisible authority? The resolution came through deliberate friction. London learned that coordination needed disagreement to remain healthy. Alignment could not be automatic. It had to be earned, tested, and occasionally broken. Frameworks were adjusted to protect divergence. Parallel responses were encouraged. Signals that contradicted consensus were surfaced instead of silenced. Coordination remained, but it became conditional, allowing the system to compare paths rather than commit blindly to one. The introduction of structured disagreement into the coordination process was counterintuitive but essential, creating the internal tension necessary for the system to test its own assumptions. This recalibration restored adaptability. Institutions aligned when it mattered and separated when it didn't. Error was contained rather than synchronized. Confidence returned, grounded not in unity alone, but in the system's ability to correct itself. London absorbed a lasting lesson. Control fails under complexity. Coordination succeeds, but only if it leaves room to disagree. Stability does not come from moving together at all times. It comes from knowing when not to. The city moved forward with a lighter touch. Power no longer demanded obedience, nor uniformity. It required awareness, timing, and the courage to step out of formation when necessary. In a world too complex for command, coordination became the answer, but only when it remembered how to listen to dissent. Subscribe to join the journey. The day